from stampwithlorraine.com. I'm a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator here in the US, and today I'd like to share with you a tutorial that uses the concept of color blocking. That's where you take complementary colors and set them against each other, or just using different blocks or sections, rectangles, squares within your card to create a nice background or even a focal point. So this style of artwork was started by a Dutch artist called Piet Mondrian. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly or not, but Piet Mondrian. And he started this in the early 1900s, and it eventually spread to fashion. Other artists jumped on the bandwagon, so it's not real sure if he started it or not. But it was a very popular form of abstract art back in the early 1900s. And in the 1960s, it spread to fashion. There were women's dresses that had these blocks of color, which was inspired by the artist. So we're going to transfer that concept to the card making today. And a lot of times there are very bold and bright colors that would go into this kind of artwork. So by sectioning off different parts of our card, we are using that inspiration of that painter and others like him to make certain cards like this. So I will give you the measurements for these blocks and show you how we can elaborate on this. We can also not just use straight colored cardstock, but I'm going to show you how to use different DSP and things that we can do to create fun cards using the color block system. So stay tuned right to the very end and you'll get all the measurements. Don't forget to go to my blog, stampwithlorraine.com, and if you haven't already signed up for my newsletter, don't forget to do that too. You'll get a lot more hints and stay in touch with what's happening with Stampin' Up! And stay in touch with some of the classes that I will be bringing forth to you soon. So hope you enjoy this tutorial. All right, so in the art world, there's something called color blocking, and it became popular like in the 1930s and 40s when an artist did some artwork that was abstract kind of things where he had just blocks of color, nothing else, no images, just different blocks of color. And you might have remembered a trend for such a thing. So one of his pieces of work simply had squares that were red, yellow, blue, and white. Okay, different shapes, and they kind of fit together within his large canvas, his large square, I believe it was, canvas. So using those same colors, this is kind of inspired by that artist. And then in the 1960s, that trend came into some fashion. So you might even remember there were some, quote, modern dresses that were like a very straight sleeveless dress that had these blocks of color on, black background, and then these little blocks of color. So it wasn't exactly these shapes, but the same kind of idea. So what I did here was, I'm going to give you these measurements of these squares later when you're I'm showing you some other designs for this pattern. So what I did was, in keeping with the colors, I simply took, to make it a little bit more interesting for a card, I took some die cuts and I put them on the same color panel to keep the integrity of those colors. All right, so I have from Stitched Blooms, I put this stitched flowers, 3 little ones, and the leaf here, and I put my sentiment here. And this is on a tailored tag punch. All right, so some dimensional dots on the back. I used the black dimensional so they wouldn't show up. And then that's going to go on the black background, of course, with a white card inside. So just to kind of mimic that style, that's kind of what I did there. But then if you wanted to, just showing you ways to mix things up a little bit, to take it a step further, you might say, is I took the elements here and I kind of rotated them around a little bit so that, oops, had pieces all set up ahead of time, so that it kind of gave you sort of an extension of what this was before. What else you can do is to just put the black on the white background as well. And then put your elements on in different colors. All right, so this time I have the whites there. I use colors there. So that's just kind of like another take on the design. So I don't know if it would be exactly called color blocking, but you know, it's kind of that the term has kind of extended itself into things that are just sort of based on that. All right, so that's kind of, you know, just a plain, simple sort of a modern look, okay, where you can take that same basic idea, kind of like a sketch, and elaborate on it a little bit. But then to take that other one a little bit further, I have the same panels here with the same colors. And when I get this on my blog and Facebook, I will show you examples of that artist's work, and you'll see how it kind of is inspired by this. So instead of the same color on the panels, I just kind of mixed it up. It's keeping that same idea for the background. Okay, so I just put different colors on the panels so that they stand out. So it gives it a little bit more interest, not quite as plain, but you know, just a different kind of look. The way these tone on tone, the same colors are on here, it almost gives it like an embossed look. So that's kind of an interesting way to go about. And you know, primary colors, you know, it could be good for a kid, or you know, just a simple card. Okay, so and then that of course would get mounted on the black card as well. Okay, so this is kind of like the basic concept. And then to take that a little bit step further, we're going to do the same thing with some DSP. And so I already have my card bases here. And like I said, I'll give you these measurements in a moment. With all the same measured squares, which are actually going to be cut from one piece. We'll just cut the big piece and then divide it. All right. So let me put this one up here. If you notice, I put all the squares sort of in different order. So the order doesn't really matter. Okay, it can be any way that you like. And if you want, you can even turn it horizontally to get a different kind of look from that as well. All right, so that's what you have there. And then I took 4 pieces, because this is going to make 4 cards. I took 4 pieces of designer paper, starting at 3 3/4 by 5. All right, so basically, this is what the whole thing is like when it's all together. So 3 3/4 by 5. And like I said, I took 4 different designs and just cut them all down from that. Okay, all the same. So that's real easy, especially if you have a really good cutter. You can do 2 sheets at a time and carefully get all the same measurements. So then from there, you can just kind of mix and match and see how you want it to go. So this one I already mounted on the black. These I mounted the black on the white cardstock just for convenience for this video. So it's already done. So let's say I have that piece over there. If you wanted, you could put maybe just the flip side, and you could just alternate 2 designs. Okay, now this one has a definite up and down because of the bird, but so I wouldn't necessarily put it this way unless I had the card horizontal. So that can look pretty, or you can just mix and match. This particular paper is Friendly Hello from the Celebrations, which coordinates with the Friendly Hello stamp set that you can get at a level 2. And so it has kind of a subtle pattern on one side, and it has a printed on the other side. Some are just the flowers and the color and the white. Some have the black highlights on them. So it's really kind of neat. So you can obviously just kind of play around and see what you like. If you want all 4 different colors, you can do that. What do I need there next? I need some blue. Well, the blue is over here. So I would have to kind of mix that up a little bit. So maybe just put another peach down there. You can play around and see what looks good. If you want all the same kind of design, you want to mix it all up. So that's good there. Maybe this one will be just 2 and 2. You can put 4 different ones. Obviously, it's all up to you. All right, so I'm left with, let's take this away and put that up there. And we'll turn this around. Okay, so that one has all 4 colors. You could do this with just the plain cardstock or any designer series paper, right? All right, and then from there, you can add your sentiment to it, whether it's a label or die cut, like I did on here. You can take one of these die cuts, put that across if you like. You can take, there's the one I glued down. I thought this would look cute. Taking a little piece of the gingham ribbon in the black and white, making a little bow and then wrapping it around that panel, that block. Oh, I went too far here. Okay. Just adjust it until it's the size ribbon you want, and then wrap it around before you glue it down. And then that could look cute on there. I was envisioning this one going vertical, so that's okay. Let's just do this. We'll make that one horizontal. Whatever. Mix and match and see which ones you like. See how you like it. So I'll put all those together and show you how that turns out later. Alrighty, so then for another option, keeping the same idea of the same size panels, we're going to use embossing folders. We started out with your card base, white or vanilla, typical size, 8.5 by 5.5, scored at 4 1/4. All right, and then you need 2 more sheets that are 5 1/4 by 4. And then another one that is your 3 3/4 by 5. All right, now they're not going to stay layered like this because we're going to cut them into those panels. So let me bring my trimmer over. All right, so take your top layer and we're going to cut that. We want to cut off 1 1/4 inches. So you can measure from over here or the other way around. I'm going to cut 1 1/4. Okay, then we have our 2 pieces. Then from that 1 1/4 size, we're going to turn it and cut off another 1 1/4. So you'll be left with that square. All right, so now you have 1 1/4 and 3 3/4. That's going to be 2 of our blocks. All right, now the other side measures 2 1/2. So we're going to turn that around. Now remember, this is a length of 5. We're going to cut it down to 3. And your remaining part will be 2. All right, so you're left with 2 1/2 by 3, 2 1/2 by 2. These are 1 1/4 wide. This one is 1 1/4 tall. This one is 3 3/4. All right, so that's going to be our top layer. But actually, not a big deal. But I'm going to kind of rewind myself here and do this over. Hold on. Okay, it actually would be better to color it first. All right. So I'm going to take my blending brushes. You can do it on each individual piece. So, but it really would be kind of easier to do it before you cut it. That way, I don't know, just a little easier to do one piece than four, right? All right. So sorry about that. All right. So we're going to use So Saffron and Mango Melody. You can use any two colors that are just one lighter shade than the other. So different shades of blues or different purples or greens or whatever. Okay, so I'm going to do the lighter one first, and I'm going to start off my page and bring it in, and I'm going to be looking for not a real smooth coverage here. I want it to be kind of blotchy, to have different shades within the piece of paper. So we're going to do this real quick and then go over it with some darker to give a variety of shades on here. So if you've already cut your paper, you can always still just do the individual pieces, right? Not a big deal. Just a little easier to do one large piece. Not a problem. All right, so then you can play around with the colors, bring them in. All right, so now I'm going to go to my mango. Okay, start off the page a little bit so you don't get too much of a block, like a real dark block, a brush look. You don't want that to happen. So bring that in a little bit. Make it as dark or as light as you want. And I wanted to sort of have that faded look. All right, I'm going to do a little bit more because I want it a little darker. And then we're going to emboss this, but we're going to cut it first and then emboss each panel with a different embossing folder. So if you have 4 different ones, that's great. Or maybe you might want to do just 2 and 2 and have the opposite corners the same embossing folder. Or if you have an embossing folder that has a variety of images on it, like flowers, and each section of the embossing folder has different flowers, so then maybe you can do one and just flip them and turn them in different directions so that they don't actually match up to be one big design. Or maybe you want it in one big design. That's okay too. All right, so we're going to leave it at that. Like I said, you can take it to whatever darkness and color you want. All right, put those aside. And then we would cut that into our 4 panels. So one more time, 1 1/4, 1 1/4 again, and then 3. So that's 3 and 2 by 2 1/2, and then the 1 1/4 panels. All right, so now our next part, we want our first layer. We want each of these to be matted. So I'm using gray granite, and that's going to be 1/8 bigger than each of these panels here. So this was 3, 2 1/2 wide by 3. So I'm going to go to 2 5/8. So 1/8 more than 2 1/2. 2 5/8. So that's going to give me just a 1/16 of an inch around each side. So it's going to be just very, very thin, just enough to give it a nice little frame and define it off of the white. All right, remember it was 3 inches tall. So we're going to go 3 1/8 this way. So now that's going to be like that. And this one will be like that. And then we are left with 1/8 more than 1 1/4. So that's 1 3/8 already. So then we just have to turn it. And we're going to, this was 3 3/4. We're going to go 3 7/8. So think You can try to remember 3 7/8, or you can just think, oh, that was 3 3/4. I'll go an extra eighth. And then you'll have your 4 panels. Okay. All right, then this is where your embossing folders come in. I will be using greenery, which is good for if you have the mini embossing machine. It comes with 2 plates. One has rows and rows of little leaves, and the other has just these little different sprigs and sprays. So that's the one I'm going to use. You could use either one. And I am going to make it a little different from the one that my first sample that I did. I'm going to bring this, well, actually, no, I'm not, because that's a little bit too big. The paper's a little too big. It doesn't cover the whole thing. So never mind. I'm going to do my original. I'm going to take my little piece and I'm going to arrange it to a spot where it's going to catch a good amount of the pattern that I want there. So I'm going to bring it down to this corner and close it up and run it through. Now these are regular embossing, regular embossing folder. So this plate here on the new machine is just for the 3D embossing folders. So in order to use just the regular folders, you need your base plate number 1, and then you need your 2 lucite plates. Let me get those. Aren't these well loved? My gosh, they're so so etched. It's crazy, but they still work. I did buy new ones this month. Put in my order of things I needed and got my celebrations as well. That was fun. Okay, so I have my little pattern there. All right, and that's going to go on there. So each panel is going to have a different embossing on there. So you don't need to see me do all the embossing, but the ones that I'm using are that greenery, pretty flowers. I love this one. It's so pretty. It's really nice. Love it. That was a new one. It's the first time I'm using it. Macrame, same thing. It has that rope design. Okay, raise your hand if you did macrame back in the 70s. I did. Definitely. And then this one is Time Worn Type, which aside from the name, it does say type. If you look closely, you do see some type on there, but it's very, very subtle. Very worn, I guess. But it has very subtle background. Let's see if I can get a better look for you here. Very subtle, kind of splotchy look, but then some little tiny words there. I mean, I can't even read it. I think I see the word water. I see today. I don't know if it's probably some saying, but I haven't tried to figure it out. So those are my 4 embossing folders, and then I'm going to put it together. Voila! Already done. So we'll put those together. Again, you can arrange them any way you like. Now, I liked this big flower up here, so I wanted to be sure to have that one sort of my focal point. I just thought that was really pretty, and the way the shading went on there, that's fine. If you think you need a little bit more shading, once it is embossed, you can go back with probably your little bit darker color and go over it again, and it will pick up those raised parts. And if this is too broad for you, then you can use your sponge daubers, which I very often go to my blending brushes. But if I want to highlight just a little piece, it might be easier to use the daubers. And just go very lightly, don't press into it, and it will highlight the parts that are raised. And because these aren't really brushes, it doesn't get down into the parts that are recessed. So it's probably a little easier to do that. Okay, so that's how I got some of that extra shading on there. Alrighty, so then that's your basic card. From here, you can put your sentiment on, or you can add a die cut, which is what I did here. I cut this from Harvest Dies, which coordinates with Nature's Harvest stamp set. And I cut out these little tall stalky flowers. And then I took my gray granite and highlighted that just a little bit, just so it didn't look quite so flat in color. So notice I put this is basic gray, but it could cross over from my gray granite. I put my labels on here, so I keep all my sponge daubers together. This is an old Stamp It Up case that had a lot of little mini stamps in it. So that's what I use for my sponge daubers. But you can buy a lot of little cases where they all fit in there nicely. I do have another one where they stand upright, which is fine, but I can't see the name. So this way, I like it this way so that I can see the names on there. All right, so taking your sponge dauber, just lightly add a little bit of shading to that. Now notice you have to be really careful not to pull like that, not to pull your little fragile pieces. So here's a hint for you. I'll show you with this other die cut. Once you die cut it, much easier to add your highlighting if you leave it in the whole piece. Don't pop it out like this, where it's going to get caught or possibly bent. Leave it in here and it'll be a lot easier to go over and shade the parts you want. And also you will kind of see a difference. You'll see, okay, yeah, I missed that part, because there'll be contrast between your actual die cut and what you're doing. So it's not getting caught on the edges, and I'm able to just, from there, then just continue to pop it out. And it's a lot easier than maybe catching the little pieces on your sponge. Okay, so just a little helpful hint there. And of course, these delicate die cuts would be nice to run with your adhesive sheet on the back. I didn't do that because I wasn't exactly sure what my plan was. But this is in gray granite also. I'm going to just glue this down here. Again, think of where your patterns are, because I did not want to cover that flower. Normally, I would put this to the left and sentiment off to the right, but I didn't want to cover that flower because I just love that flower there. So I'm going to move this over this way a little bit and then put my sentiment a little bit more over here. And I used a lot of my, oh, here it is, my many messages, okay, the stamp set that comes with the die that cuts it all out. So this is all big one stamp. I have it on my Stamparatus where I can re-ink it and re-ink it until make sure all those little tiny fonts are inked up and stamped nicely. So this matches perfectly up with that one big stamp. All right, so once I glue this all together, okay, it'll be something like that. And you can experiment around where you want your sentiment to be. Based on your design or how you lay these out, you have lots of options. So I'll put those all together and show them off on Facebook and on my blog. So thanks for watching, and can't wait to see what you do.